Hi, everybody. So today we're going to cover the beginnings of the late Middle Ages, the Catholic Church, and the Crusades. This one's a real keeper, so stay with me. In the second half of the medieval period, life got a little bit better for most people, and the church became more energetic. The popes decided to approve new organizations of monks and nuns who wanted to try to purify Christianity. The Pope had a group of advisors who made canon law. Remember, canon law means church law. This group was called the Papal Curia, C-U-R-I-A. However, some of the misdeeds of the clergy persisted in the continent of Europe. Some priests and nuns didn't follow their vows to only love God. They were having relationships on the side. And they started families of their own even. Some clergy sold church offices to people who had money instead of giving those church offices to the people who were best qualified. That's called simony. Some monks, called friars, decided to live amongst the people instead of living in monasteries, and they would preach to the people and try to spread the word. Saint Dominic is one of those people, and he started an organization of monks named for him, the Dominicans, the Dominican monks. And St. Francis from Assisi started an organization of monks called the Franciscans, named for Francis. They spread the word while becoming absolutely dirt poor, giving away all of their possessions and listening for Jesus' words and advice. By the way, St. Francis of Assisi, the big claim to fame that made him a saint was that birds talked to him. St. Francis of Assisi, famous for talking to birds. They would tell him what God wanted. There were women who started new orders of nuns, like Hildegard of Bingen, B-I-N-G-E-N, and also Clare. They started the Good Clares. Big cities in Europe became centers for religion, and they would have bigger churches. The ones that a bishop would work from are called cathedrals, and there's actually a reason that they're called cathedrals and not churches. A cathedra is the throne of a bishop. So a place where a bishop has his headquarters, has his throne, is a cathedral. The old cathedrals were built in a Romanesque style. Now, the interesting thing about Romanesque style is that the walls are super thick to support the weight of the roof. The roof is really, really heavy. It's made of lead. And so the walls need to be super thick. There need to be not too many windows because that'll reduce the holding strength of the walls. And the windows need to be thin, so they don't let in that much sunlight. So Romanesque churches have fat, thick walls, not that many windows, and they have to be lit on the inside with a lot of candles. When the sun shines, when it's cloudy out, it doesn't matter. They don't really get much sunlight. So Romanesque cathedrals, very moody, very dark. By 1120, architects had discovered that there were ways that you could still support a heavy lead roof and not have to have these gigantic thick walls with very few windows. They wanted more stained glass windows. Stained glass windows are really, really beautiful when the sun shines directly on one. Not only is it a beautiful thing to see in the wall, but the light as it floods through the cathedral is beautifully colored, and it colors the floors of the cathedral. So it's really, really wonderful having stained glass in churches and cathedrals. They wanted more. They wanted bigger windows, wider windows, more windows. And they were able to do that because they decided to have thinner walls, more windows, and support the actual weight of the church with crutches. They built crutches that extend out from the walls near where the roof meets the wall, called buttresses. And because they're outside the building, not inside the building, they are flying buttresses because they almost look like wings coming out. So if you take a look at any of the churches like, for example, Notre Dame Cathedral, which was damaged recently by fire, then you'll see these flying buttresses coming out. They're pretty much exactly crutches for the roof of a church. They take a tremendous amount of the weight off the walls, and that means you can have thinner walls, walls with more windows, wider windows. So this advance from the Romanesque style to the Gothic style of churches and cathedrals was pretty important in European history. Now let's talk about the Crusades, something about the church that one can debate is not a great advance, unlike architecture. Around the year 1095, the emperor of the Byzantine Empire, remember that's the eastern half of the Roman Empire after it collapses. The western half breaks down, eventually becomes the Holy Roman Empire. The eastern half was the Byzantine Empire. Well, the emperor of the Byzantines had noticed a buildup of Muslims getting ready for a big invasion of his territory. Now, of course, the capital for the Byzantine Empire is Byzantium, Constantinople. Nowadays it's called Istanbul, not Constantinople. But play the song if you want. Okay. You're back? Good. Okay. So the deal is that this Muslim invasion force was coming closer and closer to Constantinople, and they had already taken the Holy Land, and we need to take the Holy Land back, the places where Jesus had lived. So he put out a distress call to the nobles of Europe and to the Pope. Come save us. Now, he didn't want a very big army. He really didn't think he would need a very big army, and he certainly didn't want a peasant army. He wanted a small group of disciplined, professional soldiers, knights, right? So he wanted the Pope to organize some dukes and some earls and some barons and get their knights together and come with maybe 1,000 men. And that would probably be enough to stop the Muslim invasion. But the Pope, Urban II, saw this distress call as an opportunity. He didn't own any land in the Middle East. And he thought, well, if I have this opportunity here and now to conquer the birthplace of Jesus, to conquer the place where he was crucified, if I can have an invading army that works for me, and these guys can go over and take the Holy Land, we're not going to give it to the Byzantine emperor. We'll keep it. It'll be papal territory. The Pope will control it. So he called not only the nobles of Europe, but he put out the distress call to the peasants of Europe. He said to them, anyone who comes on a crusade, anyone who gives up their lives, as they are right now, dirty, horrible peasant serf farming, and instead marches all the way to the Middle East and conquers the Holy Land, captures the place where Jesus was crucified for us, that person will get into heaven without any kind of delay, without having to go to purgatory for the sins that they forgot to confess, it doesn't matter if you murder people on the way, right? Now, normally murder would be a pretty big sin, and you definitely want to get confession for that and all that. You may have to do quite a lot of Hail Marys and Holy Fathers in order to make up for murder. But instead, the Pope said, go for it. Kill whoever you want. Do it. Go kill as many Muslims as you can in the Holy Land in order to conquer it and keep it for us. So, when the Pope did that, and also the Pope said that Muslims as leaders, as the conquerors of the Holy Land, that they were treating people in the Holy Land really, really badly, that Christians were being killed if they tried to get to Jerusalem to pray at the Christian churches there. The Pope said this to people. This wasn't actually true. It had been true 30 or 40 years before, but it wasn't what the Muslim leadership at the time of the First Crusade was actually doing. They were quite friendly to Christians. They let Christians come all the way to the Holy Land. They let Christians pray in Christian churches without harassment. But that didn't really fit the Pope's murder call. And so the Pope demanded that peasants of Europe give up what they were doing and go to the Holy Land. So they did, in huge numbers. There were massive peasant armies, tens of thousands of peasants. Now, these people have not planned. They have not packed. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know how far the Holy Land is. And so this massive peasant army, it's not even an organized, coherent army. It's just big groups of peasants. They're marching to the Holy Land, and they need food, and they need shoes, and they need replacement clothing, and they need more weapons. So what do you think they do every time they stop at a town along the way? Do you think they packed enough money? Do you think they ever had enough money to actually make a trip like this? No, they stole. They stole, and they burned down the cities, and they killed all kinds of people in the city. Because, hey, the Pope said it's okay to kill, right? We're doing fine. As long as we're doing God's work, we're going to take back the Holy Land. If we kill some people along the way, so what? So these crusading peasant serfs were murdering people all the way to the Holy Land. Yeah, great move. They got to Constantinople, and the Byzantine emperor was like, "Who the heck are you guys?" And they said, "Oh, we're here to save the Holy Land for you. The Pope told us to show up." And the Byzantine emperor was like, "Well, you're not coming in my city. I've heard reports of what you've done to other cities along the way when you've burned them and killed all the people. You're not coming in here." Now, the interesting thing is that Byzantium, Constantinople, now Istanbul, play the song if you want. I'll wait. Okay. So, the Byzantines had built a gigantic wall around Constantinople. It was as impressive as the Great Wall of China, except it was smaller. It was circular around the city of Constantinople itself. So these Christian European serfs were not getting in. The Byzantine emperor said, "Here, take some food. Don't stay here. I don't want you staying around the city walls. Get out. Go. The Muslims are that way. Go do what you're going to do." So he gave them food, and they marched on their way. And the interesting thing is that they got ambushed. They got tricked. The Muslims saw them coming and decided to lead them down a really long valley by sending a spy into the Christian camp to claim that there was a whole bunch of unguarded gold down this valley. So the Christian peasant army marched off down the valley, but the Muslims were waiting on top of the mountains on either side, came down, slammed in, and of course the Muslim army is a professional army made up of soldiers with real weapons and real armor. And the Christians at this point were peasants with pitchforks and cloth. So the Christian peasant serf army that was hoping to take the Holy Land back was wiped out, pretty much completely eliminated. At this point, though, the Christian knights, the barons and dukes and earls, had made their way to the Middle East, to the Holy Land. And so they showed up and led, not by the Pope stayed in Europe, but led by some of the dukes who were high-ranking. Even a king or two of small European countries decided to go on this crusade. They marched into the Holy Land. They completely surprised the Muslims. They had good weapons. They had very good armor. And so they were actually able to beat the odds and conquered the city of Jerusalem. So the Muslims were taken by surprise. They lost Jerusalem in the year 1099. They defended it for a month, but then the Christians got control of it. Now, the interesting thing is there were Christians living in Jerusalem. There were Jews living in Jerusalem because the city of Jerusalem was a holy place for all three of the major monotheistic religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. When the Christians conquered the city, they ran through the streets murdering everyone. This was their final reward for marching so long and so hard and so many of their friends dying along the way. They just slaughtered everyone. Absolutely everyone was slaughtered in the city of Jerusalem. Christians and Jews and everybody. They even burned down Christian churches full of Christians because they just couldn't trust that there weren't Muslims there hiding. So, kind of crazy. Anyway, the Crusaders had won the first crusade. They divided the land that they conquered into 4 chunks. They created 4 kingdoms for them to run. They had lost a lot of that territory within the space of about 50 years. And so they had a second crusade to try to reconquer it in 1144. But the second crusade was a failure. By 1187, the Muslims had actually taken back all of the land from the Crusaders that they'd ever gotten from the first crusade. So they had a third crusade in 1189 to take it all back. The kings of France and England and the Holy Roman Emperor were all scheduled to appear in the Third Crusade to go fight this war. The King of France quit. He had an argument with the King of England. The King of England was Richard the Lion-Hearted, or in French, Cœur de Lion, heart of a lion. So, Richard the Lion-Hearted of England was also the Duke of Normandy in France. And so he had to be loyal to the King of France, but he wasn't. He was a very rebellious noble. And so the King of France was like, fine, if you're going to be this rebellious while you're supposed to be my vassal, then I'm not going on the crusade with you. So he quit. He went home. The Holy Roman Emperor actually drowned in a river on his way to the Holy Land. He was in full battle armor, crossing a river on his horse. The horse misstepped or reared up, and he fell off his horse, went straight to the bottom of the river, and his men couldn't save him in time. He was in full battle armor. There was nothing they could do. Only Richard the Lion-Hearted made it to the Middle East and fought in the Third Crusade. He fought the greatest of all the Muslim generals, a guy named Saladin. They fought to a standstill in the year 1192, the end of the Third Crusade, and they decided to call a truce rather than admitting one side beat the other. Saladin kept the city of Jerusalem, but promised that Christians would always be allowed to come and safely visit all of the Christian churches in the city. There was a Fourth Crusade that was fought in 1204. That was a disaster. Constantinople was actually... Now, Constantinople is a friendly city to the Crusaders. It's on the way to the Middle East. It's run by a Christian Byzantine emperor. Didn't matter. In the Fourth Crusade, they actually invaded Constantinople, burned a lot of stuff, stole a lot of stuff. So, yeah, own goal there, guys. Own goal. Not good. Bizarrely, in the year 1212, a whole bunch of children used interesting logic to justify them going on a crusade by themselves. Basically, okay, here's the deal. How old are you? You're like 14, right? Well, if you're sitting in my classroom, you're 14. If you're watching this on YouTube or something, maybe you're 45 or 50 or 55, and you're just catching up on lost history lessons from high school or something. But if you're 14 or 15, who do you think has sinned more in their lives? You or me? Well, I'm almost 50 at this point, and I've probably sinned more than you. Therefore, God doesn't approve of me quite as much as he approves of you, right? If you've sinned less, God loves you a little bit more. So these children used that logic to go on crusade. They said, God will love us more. We're 10 years old. We're 8 years old. We're 12 years old. God loves us more because we've sinned less. God will give us a victory. So they went to the Pope, and the Pope said, you guys are kind of crazy. And they said, doesn't matter. Give us permission. So the Pope gave permission for them to be a crusade. Thousands and thousands of children, pre-high school age children for the most part, made their way to the cities of northern Italy like Venice. and they were going to get on boats. They paid the boatmen to take them to the Middle East. They weren't going to march there. They were going to sail straight to the Middle East, get off the ships. God will let them conquer the Muslim defenders, and then they will own Jerusalem, right? So that was their plan. They get on the boats after paying the sailors to take them to Jerusalem. And the sailors sail out of port and should have taken an eastward direction once they went by the boot of Italy, the heel of the boot. They should have sailed east to go towards Israel and Jerusalem. Instead, they sailed southwest to go to North Africa because the sailors were selling the children into slavery. They had been paid by the children to take them to the Middle East, but they wanted more money. So instead of fighting Muslims, these children sailed to North Africa with these sailors and were then sold by the sailors into slavery to the Muslims. Yep. So it was an epic failure. It's called the Children's Crusade. Horrible, horrible failure. Towns in Europe lost an entire generation of kids to the Muslims. They became slaves of the Muslims. Just crazy. So, let's leave the actual Crusades in the Middle East and talk about Spain for a few minutes. From the 1100s to the 1400s, Spain fought an ongoing war to try to reconquer southern Spain, especially from the Muslims, the Moors. That's what they were called in Spain. The Muslims were Moors. This war is called the Reconquista, the reconquering of Spain, the Reconquista. After the Reconquista succeeded, their king and queen, Ferdinand and Isabella, you may recognize their names, they're the same people who send Christopher Columbus westward to go east. Yes, genius move. So they sent him with 3 ships in the year 1492. Incidentally, 1492 is the exact year, the exact month of the year that Columbus sails out is when Ferdinand and Isabella capture the last of all of the Muslim-held cities. So they waited until the Reconquista was over, and then they had money to give Columbus. So these rulers, Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile, the 2 parts of Spain, they have combined their territory to make 1 country instead of 2, and they force the Jews and the Muslims who still live in Spain to either get out or to convert to Christianity. But here's the thing, they don't trust them. Even if they do convert to Christianity, they have deep-rooted suspicions that these people faked their conversion, and they must be investigated. And so that happens in something called the Spanish Inquisition. They do investigations of all people whose families used to be Muslim or Jewish, and if they think that you're not a loyal Christian, instead you've gone back to being Muslim or Jewish, then they will pick you up off the street or from your house and torture you. The tortures were really, really incredible and horrible, and I'll describe a few for you, because what is history if not bloody and bizarre? So, one of the best tortures of the Spanish Inquisition was called the Iron Maiden. With the Iron Maiden, it's basically a coffin that's standing vertically. And once you open the lid, you'll see that there are spikes. The whole interior of it is spiked. You'll be put inside it. There's just enough space in the coffin for your body, unless you're particularly hefty. But there's just enough space in your body for them to close the coffin door and have the spikes be on your body but not puncturing your skin. And they leave you there for minutes and hours and hours and hours. And you have to keep yourself from moving from side to side or forward and back. Some of you can't even do that for a 3-minute presentation in class, right? You need to be moving. Well, you have to stand rigidly still in the Iron Maiden, because anytime you shift the weight of your body, you will start puncturing your skin with those spiny needles. So the Iron Maiden, there's the rack. The rack is basically like an extension ladder that you're tied to, hands and wrists. And it's a very, very strong kind of ladder with a crank. And they lay you down on this, they tie you down, and they say, "What did you do? What did you do? What did you do?" And every time you don't confess to something, anything, they will turn the crank, and it pulls your body further and further and further apart until you dislocate your ankles and your knees and your hips, your wrists, your elbows, and your shoulders, just completely popped out of place in every possible way. Another fascinating one was they would take your arms, put them behind your back, and tie them together to a rope. And then throw the rope over a beam that goes across the ceiling. And then, if you don't confess, they start pulling the rope, which pulls your body up by your wrists behind your back. And so you're being completely suspended, up, up, up. And it just kills your shoulders because you're being pulled backwards and up by your wrists. Completely put your shoulders out of whack. And then once you're as high as you can go, they let go of the rope and hold it again. And you fall a foot or 2 feet and you just jerk in place and it pops your shoulders right out of their sockets. So awful. These are some of the more popular tortures of the Spanish Inquisition. There's also another one, which we did recently, the USA. It's called waterboarding. In these days that we're talking about, what they would do is they would take a strip of cloth and insert that strip of cloth into your mouth and shove it down, force feed it down you into your throat, deep into your throat. And then they would put a mask, a hood, over your face and pour water all over the hood. The water is going to soak through the hood onto your face, onto that cloth, and it's going to travel right down your throat, and it's going to give you the very strong sensation that you're drowning. You're actually drowning. We did it a little bit differently here when we, right after September 11th, 2001, were trying to investigate terrorist attacks. The U.S. government at that time decided waterboarding was not torture, which would have been illegal. Instead, it was a valid way of getting information from suspected terrorists. So the U.S. government waterboarded a whole bunch of people who hadn't even officially been charged with any crimes yet. They were just being held on suspicion of being terrorists. And we waterboarded them, which a lot of countries in the world really strongly objected to as a form of torture and doing it on people who hadn't even been charged with a crime. So, yeah, interesting. There was one conservative radio talk show host of a local TV station, not nationally syndicated, who actually said, no, it's not torture. This isn't torture. We should be able to do this. And so someone challenged him, if that's how you really feel, will you volunteer to be waterboarded? And he volunteered. He was waterboarded on air. He knew that he couldn't drown, but when they actually conducted the waterboarding procedure on him, he tapped out after a second and a half, just about. He said, no, that is not acceptable. That is torture. We should not be doing that to people. So anyone who's experienced it has agreed it is torture. Literal torture, not just metaphorical torture like having to listen to my classroom lectures. Real torture. Okay. So, what are the results of the Crusades? Well, Europeans who went to the Holy Land had found new food. That was really cool. Spices, cloth, right? Incredible stuff that was way beyond what Europeans had at that time in history. They brought some home. This meant that more people became used to Middle Eastern products and stuff that had come from the Middle East from other places, and they wanted some. So that meant there was a constant, permanent trade relationship between the Middle East and Europe because Europeans wanted goods from the Middle East. However, there was now a permanent distrust between Muslims and Christians, forever and ever, due to the way the Crusades were handled. With fewer knights and lords to compete for power, the popes benefited. They were able to get more control over their papal lands. But the popes had failed in their overall goal of creating a Holy Land empire for themselves. Jews. Now, that's one thing I've left out of the lecture so far. Anytime that the Pope declared a new crusade, that meant that Christians got the message it's okay to murder people who aren't Christian. And why travel all the way to the Middle East? Why go 1,000 miles to murder some people that you've never met when there's people who live on the other side of your own town that you owe money to? And wouldn't it be convenient for you never have to repay them? And so the Jews were victims. They were slaughtered every time there was a crusade. In England, in the city of York, there's a place called Clifford's Tower. It's a ruin today, but it's this white beaker-shaped tower. And the Jews of the city of York, when the Pope had declared a new crusade, the Jews decided, we're going to get murdered unless we get inside somewhere where we can be protected. So they went to Clifford's Tower. And they hid inside. They barricaded the doors. The Christians surrounded it, demanded that they surrender so that they could be killed. Eventually, now the Jews thought, I guess, that eventually the Christians would just go home and be okay with the Jews and not worry about it anymore. In reality, the Christians waited outside Clifford's Tower for weeks and then months, and the Jews inside lost all hope of escaping. So the men inside the tower killed their families and then committed suicide themselves. And then the last one set fire to the inside of the tower because they would not allow themselves to be captured and tortured by the Christians waiting outside. So this is what happens to the Jews every time there's a crusade. Why did the European citizens, the Christians, owe the Jews money? I did mention that. So here's the deal. The Pope had declared it was illegal to loan a person money and expect interest on the loan. That's called usury, and it's a sin. And so Christians didn't go into banking because why bother giving someone money for a loan, especially large amounts of money, if there's no way they're ever going to be able to pay you back? So there were some people in Europe who didn't have to follow the Pope's rules, and these were the Jews. So the Jews, when they got money, loaned that money out to Christians and charged reasonable interest rates because they were allowed to and because it made sense for them to go ahead and do it if nobody else was. So European businesses borrowed money from the Jews and prospered. We have an entire middle class of merchants in European cities because the Jews didn't have to follow the Pope's rules about usury. But if you owe the guy down the street $5,000 and all of a sudden it's legal to kill him, the Pope says it's okay, you're earning your way into heaven by killing non-Christians, that person down the street is in danger. And that's what happens. Every time there's a crusade called, the Jews of Europe are targeted and hundreds of thousands are killed. So, the next time we're together, we will talk about chapter 14, section 2.